Steve Angeli has waited his turn. He's been with the program for 3 years, and he's spent the last 2 seasons as the backup quarterback. Now he's got a real shot to be QB1. But is he the right guy to lead the Irish in 2025? That's next on Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome in. This is Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. My name is Wojciak and I'm the host. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports. And I'm thrilled to have you here on Wednesday, February 12th. And thanks for getting your day started right here by making this your first listen of the day. Before we get rolling, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed on YouTube or your preferred podcast platform. And let's get into it. Today, we embark on part 1 of a 3-part deep dive into the biggest question of the Notre Dame offseason. Who is going to be QB1? This is the first legitimate quarterback competition that Notre Dame has had since 2016, and there are 3 legitimate contenders going into spring practice. It's rare that you have 3. Usually it's just 2, but I think each one of these guys has a real shot to be the starting quarterback for Notre Dame in 2025. The contenders are Steve Angeli, Kenny Minchey, and CJ Carr. They also have true freshman Blake Hebert in the room, but he will almost certainly redshirt this season unless things go really haywire. But what I'm going to do is devote an entire episode to each one of the quarterbacks in contention. The focus today is on Steve Angeli. He's the veteran in the room. He's entering his 4th season with the program. He's put in the work. He's bided his time. And now he has a real chance to compete for the starting job. But is he the guy to lead Notre Dame? First, I'm going to make the case why he should be the starter. Then we're going to flip it around, and I'm going to basically argue against myself and look at why he shouldn't be the guy. And finally, we'll get into what I think is actually going to happen, and I'm going to do the same exercise for Kenny Minchey and CJ Carr in future episodes, and that way we cover all the different angles for each one of these quarterbacks before they take the field in spring practice and really fight for this job. Let's get into the case for Steve Angeli. I think he has the highest floor for any quarterback this season. Yeah, he might not be the most physically gifted guy in the room, but you know what you have with Steve Angeli. He's like a sturdy, well-designed house in a suburb. You're not going to have all the bells and whistles. This is not going to be a house with massive windows and a great view of the ocean. And not everything inside the house is going to have a touchscreen, and it's not all going to be connected to Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. But you know what? When a storm hits, you're not really going to have to worry about whether or not the house can hold up. And you're not going to try to use your dishwasher and all of a sudden the stereo starts playing in another room because the connection between the devices got messed up. And now you can't even open the dishwasher. This is a real thing that happened, by the way. Steve Angeli is reliable. He's not going to be afraid, and he's not going to frustrate you because you know what you're getting going into it. Other quarterbacks might have more upside, but Angeli's high floor could be exactly what the Irish need going into the season with a bunch of talent around him on offense. And a lot of that has to do with his experience. He's the most experienced quarterback in the room, not just in terms of how long he has been with the program, but he has actually played on Saturdays. He has had to prepare like a starter the past 2 seasons as the backup. He was the backup to Sam Hartman for a full season, and he was the backup to Riley Leonard this past season. He even ran with the starters throughout spring practice last year when Leonard was recovering from his ankle surgery, and I think that's important. He has ran with the ones several times before, and he's really just been one play away from being QB1 for this team for 2 years now, and I believe that he is prepared like he's the starter during that entire time, and that's important because when you're the backup, you know that you are truly one play away from coming in and having to lead this team. That requires a different level of preparation. And yeah, I'm sure that, if you're third string, you're going to be preparing week to week, but you're not going to have that same sense of urgency if you're the backup because you know that the likelihood of you playing is pretty high. I think it's actually pretty shocking that he did not have to start one game, considering how much Notre Dame ran Riley Leonard, all the hits that he took last year. So give credit to Riley Leonard for being as durable as he was. But Steve Angeli probably thought on many different occasions, okay, now is my time. And it ended up being his time for at least one series against Penn State. We'll get into that in a moment. But I think the fact that he has had to prepare that way is extremely valuable because CJ Carr was never going to play this season. Part of that is because he was hurt, and Kenny Minchey was third string on the depth chart. So he's not going to be preparing the same way as a guy like Steve Angeli, who had a real shot to play every single week. And every single time that Steve Angeli has been out there, he has performed really well. For his career, he's completed 58 of 80 passes for a 72% completion percentage. He's thrown for 772 career passing yards with 10 touchdowns and 1 interception. And you can make the case that he should have 11 touchdowns because he threw an absolutely perfect ball to Mikey Gilbert. I believe it was in the Stanford game in the end zone. The poor true freshman just dropped it right there. Would have been his first career touchdown. It didn't happen. And unfortunately for Steve Angeli, that's one less passing touchdown on the stat sheet. He also came in for Notre Dame during one of the most important offensive possessions of the season against a Penn State defense that had shut them down all game. It was the last drive of the first half. Angeli comes in for Riley Leonard after he went down, took a hard hit to the head. And all Angeli did was go 6 of 7 for 44 yards, and he converted 2 third downs to set up a field goal that saved the game. Notre Dame went into the half only down 1 touchdown. The score was 10-3, and I honestly think Notre Dame does not win that game if Steve Angeli doesn't come in and lead the offense down the field to get their first points of the game. He was critical for the Irish in one of the biggest moments of the season. He's also started one full game. It was against Oregon State in the Sun Bowl a couple years ago, and he played really well in that game. He should have been the MVP. He finished 15 of 19 passing. That's a 78.9 completion percentage for 232 passing yards with 3 passing touchdowns to 0 interceptions. He also had a nice run of 17 yards in there as well, so he can move around. He's not afraid to try to get the edge and run for a first down. And if you look at his game long, he really only had one bad outing, and it wasn't even a bad outing. He just came in to play Stanford in the end of the 2023 season, and I think his first pass was an interception. So that's not great, but that was the only interception that he has thrown in his career. Other than that, he has been excellent every single time that he's been out there. And I think another thing you have to consider when you look at Steve Angeli is the leadership and intangibles, because this team right now, we aren't really sure who the leaders are right now. Last year, they had Riley Mills, Xavier Watts, Benjamin Morrison, Howard Cross, who wasn't even a captain, right? Riley Leonard, who's a great leader. Leaders all around. But this team, not saying that there aren't great leaders, we just don't know who they are yet. They're going to have to step up. And Steve Angeli is a guy who, by all accounts, is very well-liked and well-respected in the locker room. He could have left this team multiple times, but he stuck around to fight for this one chance to be the starting quarterback for Notre Dame, and that matters in college football. Guys take notice. He loves this team, and he loves this university, and in an era where so many players play for the name on the back, I truly believe that Angeli plays for the University of Notre Dame, and that's exactly what you want out of your starting quarterback. The guys like him, they respect him, they know that he has waited and he has worked extremely hard for this opportunity, and I think that all matters. So when you look at his experience, his performance whenever he's been out there, and all the leadership and intangibles that he brings, he has a real shot to be the starting quarterback. But is that enough to win the job? Coming up, we're going to break down the case against Steve Angeli and why he actually might not be Notre Dame's best option at quarterback. Today's episode is brought to you by WayFair. After the holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your home a little TLC. I always find that decluttering and refreshing my space helps me get back into a routine. Whether you're tidying up, clearing out, or just want to give your space a new look to start the year, WayFair has everything you need, all within your budget. I'm currently looking for furniture, and their huge selection makes it easy to find pieces that fit my style and budget. My favorite part, the free and hassle-free delivery, even for the larger items. Wayfair's site was so easy to navigate, and I found everything I needed in no time. There's something for every style and every home, no matter your space or budget. Wayfair makes it easy to tackle your New Year's home goals with endless inspiration for every space. Give your home the refresh it needs with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's WAYFAIR.com WayFair.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. All right, now that we've covered all the reasons why Steve Angeli should be the starting quarterback at Notre Dame, let's flip it around and look at the case against Steve Angeli and why he's actually not the best option for Notre Dame in 2025. So yeah, he might have the highest floor, but he also probably has the lowest ceiling of any quarterback in that room. Ask yourself, does Steve Angeli have the elite tools needed to beat top-tier teams in college football? I personally have my doubts. And when you compare him to the other quarterbacks in that room, what does he have what elite trait does he have? He doesn't have the strongest arm. He's not the most accurate quarterback in the room. He can run, but he's also not the most mobile, and I don't think he's that much of a playmaker either. He looks like a statue in the pocket sometimes. And I'm not talking like Jack Cohn level statues back in 2021 where it almost felt like he was stuck in quicksand. Like Cohn would get pressure and would just freeze and not move. And it was kind of odd because he was also considered a great lacrosse player, so you would think they'd be a better athlete, but that was not the case for Jack Cohn. So Steve Angeli is not at that level. But he got sacked 5 times this past season, and it's not like he played a ton, right? He was only coming in during the fourth quarter of these blowouts, so 5 sacks is quite a lot. He also got sacked twice in his start against Oregon State, and that was against a depleted defense for the Beavers. So the fact that he can't really avoid pressure concerns me. It's not like he's that big. He's only 6'2", 205. So it's a real question of can he hold up? And yeah, Notre Dame should have a really good offensive line next year, but who knows if they end up getting hammered with injuries like they did this past season. They're also going to go up against some really good defensive lines like Texas A&M. Yeah, they lose Nick Scorton, but Mike Elko is going to reload, and Angeli is going to have to avoid some pressure. I'm not sure if he's going to be able to do that, and when he gets sacked, it's a drive killer, man. Notre Dame cannot be set up with like 2nd and 15 or 3rd and 11 and have much success on offense. So that is a big concern of mine. And yeah, he's played and his stats are really good, but he's really only played in garbage time or against a depleted Oregon State team like I just mentioned. Pretty much all of the Beaver starters were either in the transfer portal or they had entered the NFL draft. So even though they had a good defense throughout the year, pretty much everyone left once Jonathan Smith took the job at Michigan State. The most action he got this past season was against Purdue. Purdue was about as good as a JV high school team, and he got sacked 3 times in that game. You look at who he played against this past season. Blowout games against Miami, Stanford, Navy, Florida State, and Army. He's never, in none of those games was he dealing with any legitimate game pressure, and they were all against bad defenses. So he got to come in, play freely, and the game was already, well in hand, and he got to just kind of go out there and play with the ones against bad teams. So yeah, he boosted his stat sheet a little bit. And then the year before, he put up more stats against bad teams. And yes, I know what you're thinking. What about Penn State? I already mentioned that earlier. That drive probably should have ended when he fumbled the ball. He got sacked, fumbled the ball, and if not for Billy Schrauth making this incredible play to recover the fumble, that drive ends with 0 points, and we're not talking about Steve Angeli saving the game. We're talking about Penn State beating Notre Dame to advance to the national championship, and the one moment that Steve Angeli had to really make a name for himself this season ended with him fumbling it and basically eliminating any chances of Notre Dame gaining any sort of momentum going into that half. Abdul Carter made a great play, but he was dealing with a bum shoulder. We did not really see that impact the game much in the first half, but he had a chance to get that ball after Angeli fumbled it, but it looked like he couldn't move his arm. That allowed Billy Schrauth to jump on it, and Notre Dame got a second chance on that drive. So credit to Steve Angeli for capitalizing on that second chance, but he almost never even had that in the first place. He's also been passed over twice in the transfer portal. And I think actions speak louder than words, especially when it comes to football coaches, right? The staff has not given any indication that they see Steve Angeli as the guy for this team going forward because they went out and they got 2 better guys in the portal in back-to-back years. Rather than having Steve Angeli compete with Tyler Buchner to be the starting quarterback for the 2023 season, they went out and they got Sam Hartman. When it was really his turn to compete for the job and potentially win the job in 2024 after Sam Hartman left, They went out and they got Riley Leonard from Duke. And Leonard had also missed that entire second half of the season prior and missed spring practice while he recovered from ankle surgery. And there was never a quarterback competition. It was always going to be Riley Leonard. And then you look at how 2024 started. Game 2, Riley Leonard is clearly injured against Northern Illinois. He is not playing well at all. He can't run. The Notre Dame coaching staff still kept Riley Leonard in the game over Steve Angeli. To me, that tells me that they looked at Steve Angeli and it depleted Riley Leonard and still thought that he gave them a better chance to win. A couple games later, Riley Leonard was really struggling against Miami, Ohio. Like literally could not throw a 5-yard out route. It was bad. The fans were booing. There was some serious unrest. A lot of people thought it is time to pull Riley Leonard. And the coaching staff didn't do it. Why? And before you say, well, they didn't know what they have in Steve Angeli, I hate when fans say, oh, well, you got to put this guy in to see what you have in that player. That doesn't make any sense. These coaches spend more time with these players than their actual families. Even if they're not playing on Saturdays in the actual games, these coaches watch them practice every single day, and they are with them in meetings, and they understand their football intelligence, how good they are in practice, going up against the ones or the backups. And there was never any point during this season or the season prior where Notre Dame felt like Steve Angeli gave them the best chance to win, even when Riley Leonard struggled. So to me, that tells you how the coaches think of Steve Angeli. The fact that they had no doubts. They went in the portal back-to-back years, never even gave Steve Angeli a shot to compete for the job, shows you what they have thought about Steve Angeli in the past. And I made an analogy earlier that Steve Angeli is like a well-designed home. That may be true. But maybe a more apt comparison is to a sedan. Like, yeah, a sedan is reliable. It's going to get you to where you need to go. But in today's college football landscape, you probably need a high-performance sports car to compete for championships. Steve Angeli is going to get you a win over Duke. He's going to come in, he's going to beat Oregon State. He's probably going to beat NC State. But is he good enough to beat Miami on the road? Is he good enough to beat Texas A&M, a team loaded with playmakers on defense? Is he going to be good enough to keep up with USC? Those are real questions you have to ask yourself. His floor is steady, but his ceiling might not be high enough to win the job over other quarterbacks who are more dynamic playmakers. So yeah, Angeli has his flaws, for sure, but so does everyone else in that room. If that weren't the case, there wouldn't be much of a competition. Coming up next, we're going to look at Steve Angeli's path to winning the job and whether or not it will actually happen. Stay tuned. So we made the case for Steve Angeli to be the starter, and we made the case against Steve Angeli. So will he actually be the starting quarterback? He certainly has a realistic path to winning the job. Like, I could close my eyes right now and picture the Notre Dame offense coming out on the field against Miami, and I could picture Steve Angeli leading that group. That would not shock me. He is going to get the first reps with the starters in spring practice, so he technically has a head start over Kenny Minchey and over CJ Carr because he's more experienced, because he's been around longer, and he ran with the ones throughout spring practice like I alluded to earlier. Plus, CJ Carr is still recovering from an injury that kept him out for the majority of this past season. So maybe CJ Carr isn't full go right away. Maybe they try to take it slow with him. That gives Steve Angeli more reps. Or maybe CJ Carr deals with a setback. We don't know. But Steve Angeli hasn't really dealt with any injury history throughout his time in college. So he's going to get the first shot to win this job. And whether or not he's the starter, this team absolutely needs Steve Angeli in the fall. So I believe that they are going to let this competition go into the fall because what they cannot afford is for CJ Carr to win the job and then Kenny Minchey leaves and Steve Angeli leaves because then you're just left with two scholarship quarterbacks. And that matters in this situation. Like CJ Carr might end up winning the job, don't get me wrong, but this coaching staff will do whatever it takes to keep Steve Angeli. Ultimately, Angeli is going to have to make the choice if staying at Notre Dame after the spring gives him the best chance to start for anyone in college football this upcoming season. But that matters. Steve Angeli is going to have ample opportunities in the spring to at least give him a chance to win the job in the fall. I would be shocked if the Notre Dame coaching staff comes out after spring practice and says, we have a starting quarterback, unless it's like so blatantly obvious. If it's like Sam Hartman after 2023, when they were trying to go along with this quarterback competition between Sam Hartman and Tyler Buchner, and then they went out in the blue and gold game, and Sam Hartman looked awesome, and Tyler Buchner couldn't complete a pass, the answer was there for everyone in the world to see. Sam Hartman was going to be the starting quarterback, and then Tyler Buchner transferred to Alabama a few days later. What a wild time that was, okay? So it's a little bit different now because you have three guys competing, and you're going to have to distribute the reps to all three guys. So the fact that Angeli gets those first reps with the starters, I think, is a big deal. There's a couple key questions here that will determine if Angeli can win the job. Number one, what style of quarterback does Notre Dame prefer in year two under Mike Denbrock? Because we know that they wanted to run first quarterback last year. Mike Denbrock loves mobile quarterbacks. This is the same guy that coached Jane Daniels. They ran him all the time. He ran Riley Leonard all the time. He even ran Desmond Ridder a good amount when he was the quarterback at Cincinnati. Deshaun Kaiser, when he was at Notre Dame and Mike Denbrock was the offensive coordinator, ran a ton. We know that Mike Denbrock wants a mobile quarterback, and Steve Angeli is mobile, but they're not going to be running designed runs to Steve Angeli. But it's not like Kenny Minchey or CJ Carr are built like Riley Leonard either, but I do think that they present more opportunities to run the quarterback. Number two, are they more concerned about the present or the future? This is really important because when Notre Dame picked their starting five in the offensive line this past season, they went with the higher upside and less experience. They picked Sam Pendleton to start at left guard over Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler, who had both started double-digit games for Notre Dame the season prior. They also started Anthony Knapp, a true freshman at left tackle, over Tosh Baker, who is entering his fifth season with the program. So that gives you some insight into what the coaching staff chose last season, but we don't know if they're going to take that same philosophy and apply it to the starting quarterback going into next season. And you look at Notre Dame's schedule, I think that matters a ton because they open on the road against Miami. Miami is going to be a ranked team, and then they have a bye in week 2, and then they host Texas A&M. Those are two very tough opponents. You can make the case that those are the two toughest opponents that Notre Dame will see all season. Does Marcus Freeman really want to go out there with Kenny Minchey, who has never started a game, has barely played college football, or CJ Carr, who has barely played any college football as well? Or is he going to be more willing to go with someone who's at least played, who's been around, who's played in real live games like Steve Angeli? That is very important. Because if Notre Dame was going out there and playing like Tennessee State to start the season, I think we look at this differently. But the schedule matters in this case. Now, what I think is going to happen is I think that Steve Angeli and CJ Carr are going to be the two guys after spring practice. I think it's going to be a two-man competition after the spring. And ultimately, I think Kenny Minchey is going to be forced to transfer because I do think he's very talented, and I think he's going to want a better chance to play. And there's just not really an opportunity at Notre Dame if Angeli and Carr are both better than him at this point in time because Carr is younger than him and Angeli is older. So Minchey would be the odd man out in this situation. So I think what's going to happen, Minchey's going to see the writing on the wall. He's going to leave. And then it's going to be Steve Angeli and CJ Carr going at it in fall camp. If CJ Carr is clearly better than Steve Angeli after fall camp, then they're just going to roll with CJ Carr. It's not even going to be a debate, right? If Steve Angeli is better and CJ Carr just hasn't developed as much, and maybe that his injury during his freshman season that prevented him from throwing the ball ends up being a big deal and his development is just not where it needs to be, and Angeli is clearly the better option going into the start of next season, I think they're going to go with Steve. That would be crazy to play the younger player who's not as good against Miami in the season opener just because he's the future. So if Carr is clearly better, he's going to start. And if Angeli is clearly better, he is going to start. But if it's a draw, that's where it gets interesting because you think back to 2016, Brian Kelly deemed it a draw between Malik Zaire and Deshaun Kaiser, and I don't really understand why because as those two guys played more, Deshaun Kaiser was clearly better than Malik Zaire, but Brian Kelly lost the whole locker room over that decision. The locker room was split over Zaire and Kaiser, and Brian Kelly did nothing to, improve that situation with the way that he was basically giving them turns in that game in the season opener. They're going to have to pick a guy, but I would not be surprised if Marcus Freeman picked Angeli to start the season. He goes up against Miami, he goes up against Texas A&M, and depending on how those games go, maybe they just ride it out with Angeli. or if they end up losing those games, Angeli struggles, I think that they would be willing to go to CJ Carr, assuming the battle is close. And I think it will be. A lot of people are already anointing CJ Carr as the starting quarterback for this season in the future. And maybe that is the case. Maybe CJ Carr really is that good. Maybe he is all that he was hyped up to be. But don't count out Steve Angeli. He has waited 3 years for this moment. And I think he has a real shot to be the starting quarterback. And at this point in time, as we sit here on February 12th, I think Steve Angeli will start that game against Miami. Will he start the whole season? I don't know about all that. But as we sit here today, I think it's going to be Steve Angeli. And as I've said already, and as I'm going to say again in the future, I reserve the right to change my mind depending on what happens in the spring. But that's my guess before spring practice. Again, it's going to be a great competition for all these guys, and we are going to break down the case for and against Kenny Minchey and the case for and against CJ Carr in future episodes. But that is going to do it for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. Like I said, it's the off season. It's February. We still got great stuff coming your way. So make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast. I'm going to be back right here tomorrow morning. I'll see you then.